You are listening to the
World Extreme.
World Extreme Medicine.
The World Extreme Medicine
Podcast.
In this episode, we get to discuss something near and dear to my heart, how you, Dr. Faye Lee, bucked the status quo and created an extreme medicine career for yourself that has taken you all over the world. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for putting up with my frequent travels and change of plans. Appreciate it.
We're used to that on World Extreme Medicine. It's always
I'm sure
difficult
you
to
are.
nail down our guests because it's a very adventurous and mobile lot for sure.
Yep, for sure.
And so my guest, Dr. Faye Lee, is a product of the public university system in California. She earned her undergraduate and medical degrees from UC San Diego and UC Irvine, respectively. She completed residency in emergency medicine at the busy NYU Bellevue Hospital program in New York City. Since then, she has traveled for work in a variety of environments, ranging from rural Indian reservations to busy urban hospitals, and from the wilds of Alaska to tourist towns in New Zealand and down to the Antarctic research stations. She thrives in the Arctic and Antarctic winters, and that is why I asked her on the podcast today. So welcome again. I'm just really happy to have you here.
Thanks, great to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about your journey into medicine? And you graduate from residency, you're like board certified emergency medicine. You can kind of go anywhere and be stable and have a retirement. And so what inspired you to have this unique career path?
It's been an interesting arc. I've always had it sounds so cliche and I'm sorry, but I've always had this sort of work hard, play hard mentality. And so I've always been like, okay, I'm going to work really hard so that I can relax really hard and play really hard. And I've kind of compartmentalized my work life from sort of my everyday life. And so when I was in residency at the even then I kind of, without realizing, I mean, I guess you could trace it all the way back to undergrad, right? When you could choose your own class schedule, I tended to take Tuesday, Thursday classes with sections on Wednesday. So I had a 4-day weekend every week. So I'd go kind of hard for 3 days a week. I'd have all my classes and then I'd have 4 days off every weekend. And, I would study and stuff like that, but it was more optional. It gave me the options to do what I wanted. And I love to take off for those weekends, those long weekends. And then it kind of extended into residency, where I was, and even before that, even in medical school, we had the option to sort of take an elective class and skip vacation and kind of squeeze everything together and finish a quarter early in medical school, and that saved you a quarter of tuition and also gave you sort of 3 months off at the end of before finishing medical school and starting residency to kind of do your thing. So I'd done that, and then in residency, we had to work 18 shifts in 28 days. And I just had this habit of saying, okay, well, I'll work 6 days a week for 3 weeks and take a week off every month. It's just always been something that I've done, just compartmentalized, just kind of worked really hard. And when I'm in work mode, I'm just working. And then when I'm in not work mode, I'm not working. And so that sort of carried over into the rest of the world for me, into the rest of my life for me. When I did my residency at Bellevue, I went there thinking that I really wanted to work in a big inner city hospital or a big city hospital. I'm not sure why I wanted to do that at the time, but I did. And then when I was done, I realized that I felt a little bit, I don't know, I felt like I was just kind of moving chess pieces around a board. I didn't necessarily feel like I was moving the needle very much on stuff. And so, there was no shortage of physicians in those areas. And there was a shortage of primary care physicians. There wasn't a shortage of ER doctors. So I just didn't feel like I was making a very big difference. So my pendulum really swung the other direction after residency. And my first jobs out of residency were working on Indian reservations. I worked with the Navajo in New Mexico. I worked with the Crow and the Cheyenne in Montana and Wyoming. And then that eventually took me up to Alaska. And I kind of continued this kind of locums lifestyle. That's pretty much all I've been doing since I graduated in 2007. So I'll work, pretty hard. I'll usually work about 10 days out of 11 in the first half of the month or the second half of the month, whatever it is, just so it's somewhat consistent. And I'll have about 18 to 20 days off a month to go do something different. Sometimes I'm home, but most of the time I'm not. I'm off kind of doing other stuff, and that other stuff has been, I'm just kind of an adventurer at heart. So I've always wanted to go and do, when I want to do something, I'll make a way. I'll find a way to make it, to do it. No, sorry, that was kind of a rambling answer.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. And you touched on my next one, because I was going to ask you what drew you to the idea of practicing medicine in some of these remote and honestly sometimes challenging environments.
Yeah.
But it is because we feel like we can make a difference in these places.
Yeah.
Like you see immediately that you changed, that you saved the life. Like you get immediate feedback.
I do feel like I was able to move the needle a bit more in some of these areas where they're just sometimes they're just so desperate for providers. The poor directors having to work, 20, 25 shifts a month and come in last minute to cover, whatever. And so I've felt, and I just feel like I was, just able to make more of a difference. I found it to be a little bit more fulfilling, to work in these small areas. It's really brought me to some really, really interesting places.
And so how did you end up working in New Zealand?
I've always loved New Zealand. I was actually on a trip during residency where I had kind of saved up my elective time and a bunch of vacation time, and I was doing this big surf trip in New Zealand, and just really fell in love with the place. Surfed to every little nook and cranny of that country, and decided I really wanted to try and spend a serious amount of time there. And so, yeah, I ended up working in a fairly rural hospital out there in Thames, which is on the base of the Coromandel Peninsula on the east coast-ish of the Northern Island, of the North Island, about halfway up. That was really cool. It was great surfing out there. It's just nice, kind of rural area. That got crowded actually in the summer, from their summer, which is our winter. So that was really great. That was a really great experience. I surfed a lot, I fished a lot, I met a lot of cool people. I would actually love to go back. So
how about some of the adventure? What?
I said that might be in the cards someday. We'll see. To go back. Yeah.
I suspect you will. Every time I talk to you, you're like in Tonga and swimming with whales.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, she's a great Instagram follow, folks, for sure.
I'm terrible at posting on Instagram. I'm terrible about it. I've actually done so many things I'm really bad about posting, because I will try and get some of the things posted. But yeah,
for me, do it for me.
Yeah.
And so how did you become involved? Because you've done some work like on adventure ships and like some of these sort of smaller cruise ships. Like how did you end up doing that? And what does your role entail in that setting?
Yeah, so all these kind of really cool things just kind of happened because, it's not to be reductive, not to sound reductive, but I just said yes to some things that didn't necessarily seemed a bit mundane at first. And I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit, but I'm going to say that would be my word of advice to anyone who wants to live kind of an unconventional life, is to say yes to certain things, to things that might not normally sound like great ideas at the time, or might not sound like they're going to be that interesting. I mean, literally, when I went to go work in New Mexico on the Indian reservation, I was in New York. I had finished my residency. I was still working in New York post residency at another big city hospital. I was just kind of like, I was biding my time to get out of the city. I realized that I'm not a city person after all. And someone just said, hey, have you ever thought about working on Indian reservations? I was like, I've never thought about it. Tell me more. And I looked into it and I said, yeah, what, I'll try it. And I tried it. It was kind of a trial period. I was like, yeah, I'll go for it, see how it works out for a couple of months. And ended up really loving it and staying at that facility for probably about 4 or 5 years. Still, as a locum stock, I was flying in and I was commuting. But really great experience. Really opened my eyes to those communities and kind of opened the door down the road to other Native hospitals. And then I remember talking to one of my co-residents in 2009, 2010, just saying, yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to work in a big hospital. I don't really want to have a regular job. And he said something like, well, you should look at the cruise ship medicine. I was like, that does not sound appealing to me. I didn't want to work like on the Love Boat or on these big, gigantic ships that, were big moving cities. I was like, I'm trying to avoid cities. And that's an inescapable city. But he was like, well, check out I think ASEP had a page on cruise ship medicine. I looked at it and I found that there were some pretty cool sounding trips, these expedition ships. And so I kind of emailed around some of those. And it took me a while to get my foot in the door, but once I did, it was really interesting. So I work for one company now that does polar expeditions, and we do Arctic and Antarctic trips. And I try and do about one a season. Obviously, that was on hold during COVID and stuff like that. But that was just another sort of, one of those things that I was like, I don't really want to be a cruise ship doctor, but I looked into it anyway, and it turned out to be a great avenue for me to explore. And I'd say the same thing so that's one capacity in which I work in Antarctica on these expedition ships, the Arctic and the Antarctica on these expedition ships. But prior to that, or actually, I guess after my first season working on the ships, I had been, and this is going off on a tangent. I was in Anchorage working up there, and I had a friend coming up to visit, and trying to look for something to do. I got on Groupon, and I found a hike on Matanuska Glacier, which is just outside of Anchorage. So I take my friend up there, and the glacier guide's kind of doing his usual. So, what's your name? Where are you from? Whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm Faye, and I'm from LA, but I'm here in the summer in Alaska, working for the summer. And he's like, oh, well, what do you do? And I was, well, I'm an ER doctor. I'm working at the hospital in town. He's like, oh, well, what made you come up here? And I said, I just really I think it's a beautiful place, and I think it's a nice remote place, and like I'm kind of like an off the beaten path kind of person anyway. And this guy, his name was Bill Jersa. Shout out to Bill. He was an IT guy, it turns out, for the U.S. Antarctic program. He was like, well, have you considered working in Antarctica? And I had not considered working in Antarctica. I didn't realize it was a thing. And so my mind kind of got blown. And I'm picking his brain about this whole glacier hike. All these other people were like, cut it out, lady. I was like, wait, and tell me more. And I literally applied that night. So, like I said, say yes to things, like don't just say, oh, that's, I mean, it's easy to say, oh, that's interesting, and I'll look into it, and then not ever do it. But I would say if there's any sort of interest, even if there's not, I mean, if someone tells you it might be interesting, I mean, it's worth a look. And maybe it won't be, but maybe it will, and it really, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Especially if you're in a locums like situation, you can say yes to these temporary things. Yes. And I liked the lesson in there also about perseverance. You might not land a National Geographic cruise ship or Cork expeditions, your first email, you send them, you email them, you may not hear anything back for a year and a half, or, and so I liked the lesson in perseverance there, hang on and keep throwing your name in the hat.
Absolutely.
And if you tell yourself, you know what, I really want to go on a Cork expedition to the Arctic, well, then keep throwing your name in the hat for that. And eventually they're going to be like, wow, this name keeps popping up. This person really wants to do this. Maybe we should take a look. A lot of the things that I do that I feel, extraordinarily proud of are things that, I dreamed about and asked for and threw my name in the hat, for a long time. Yes. And so it's it's okay. It's okay to take no for an answer and then try again.
Absolutely. Don't give up. It took, just so it took me, I think, 4 or 5 years to get on my first expedition.
Yeah.
And when I applied for Antarctica, I applied, I think, in the summer. It must have been the summer. It would have been like July or August of the summer And I didn't hear anything back. I was really disappointed. I was really like, oh man, I'm gonna go to Antarctica. I'm already thinking it up in my head. And I didn't hear anything back until literally I remember it was like December 26th or something like that. It was the week right after Christmas. And they said, hey, can you come out in January? And that was that first year that I applied. And I said, you know what? I cannot, because it was such late notice. They literally wanted me to come out in 2 weeks time, within 2 weeks time, and be there for about 8 months. I said, you know, I just can't, like I submitted my schedule for next month. Like I can't just bail on, you know, people I've made promises to, especially in places where, like I said, they really are kind of reliant. So I actually had to pass it up. But then I talked to the guy, the director, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm sorry I can't come out on such short notice, but I'd like to try again next year. He's like, well, yeah, you have to reapply. It's a government job, whatever. And I think I reapplied, and I don't think I got it again for another 2 years. And then it was very similar, where they said, okay, can you come out in 2 weeks? And at that point, I actually could. So I had actually been scheduled to go on a surf trip. I'd taken a month off. I'd scheduled myself for a month off. I was going to go on a surf trip and hadn't scheduled myself subsequent to that. So I had the time off. And I think they contacted me at the end of January, and they had me come out sort of mid-February, and I somehow made it work. So then I was there for 10 months that first season. It was supposed to be, I think, 8 or 9 months, but the government shut down. So I kind of got stuck there for another month or so.
It's
so that was really cool. It was another
impression.
last minute thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So first impression, you
about
land in
Antarctica.
Antarctica.
Yeah.
How is it different from other places you've worked?
It was such a man, it was so cool. It was part of this just big thing. I felt like I was part of this big thing that gosh, was just so remote and so off the wall that it was happening. You know, you're just kind of like, I can't believe that you guys do this down here. You know, I mean, and some of it's just mundane, just like, you know, it's a working town, McMurdo. I was at McMurdo, which is the main research station. The US has 3 research stations. And McMurdo is the main operational system for the whole continent, really. It's the biggest station on continent of all the different countries that are out there. And some of the stuff is mundane, like you need plumbers, you need carpenters, and you need janitors and dishwashers and stuff like that. But like the fact that this was happening in Antarctica was, I don't know, just a really cool thing. It was an immediate community, especially because my first season there was a winter. So it's a closed community. There were no scheduled flights in or out. Now, that said, I did have a few medevacs, so unscheduled flights, but for the most part, it's a closed community. So the 150 people or so that you're there with, that you end up with at the close of season, the close of summer, beginning of winter, is the 150 or so people that you're gonna hopefully end up with. And it was almost like, I mean, the easiest way to explain it is kind of like summer camp for adults, except you're working. You're living in dorms, you're eating in a cafeteria. It's extremely social. There's a remarkable amount of things to do because you're in this closed community and you know that you have to maintain your sanity. So there was like, we had multiple gyms, we had multiple leagues, we had a band room, we had open mic night, karaoke night, trivia night. You know, there's all kinds of things, and all these people to do them with. You have this immediate crowd. There's always something to do. There's always someone to do it with. Not like for instance, like in LA or New York or bigger cities, there are things to do, but they get so diluted, and everything's like, I don't want to drive in LA, or I don't want to take the train in New York, or wherever you are. Our town was like a mile, like a square mile, maybe, you know? So it was easy to kind of travel in herds, and like everyone, there was always something to do everywhere. It was a really incredible social experiment. Very cool.
Is everything connected? Like if you're going from one building to another, do you have to walk outside, or is everything inside?
You do. So, it started off as a military base, I think, way back in the day, maybe in the 50s or 60s, and it just kind of grew, and so it's not entirely cohesive. There's a lot of widgets here and there. Sometimes you just kind of put buildings wherever. Some whole buildings, like there was a lot of Quonset huts and stuff like that. So it is a town. There are streets or roads, but it's very small. Like you can get from one end of the town to the other in 10, 15 minutes for the most part. The Kiwi station, which is very cool, the New Zealand station, was about 2 kilometers away from us. You could walk it in half an hour or so. And that was really cool. It's much smaller, much more compact, but they're also much smaller than us. We had in our winter 150 people or so, in our summer about 1,000, depending. Whereas their summers, I think they had like maybe 60 or 75 in their summer, and then down to 15 or so in the winter. So it's easy for them to maintain a smaller footprint and therefore make it kind of design a more cohesive thing. And it actually is a beautiful station. Can you hear me okay?
There's I can hear you okay.
No, okay.
There's some kids.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I think it's okay.
Okay.
No, that's okay. It's the product of where we are and where we go.
Yes.
And so like medevac medevac in Alaska can take days to a week to so what are the logistics of an Antarctic medevac? I mean, you hear some of the stories on the news.
Pretty bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the summer it's not so bad. In the summer there's almost always flights going, except for when there's a weather event, which is less common in the summer. In the winter, at least in my day, which was 2013, and things have changed somewhat. In 2013, when I did this, there was no scheduled flights. So the station closes sort of mid-February, and that entails breaking the entire airport down. So navigational aids, fuel lines, electrical lines, generators, the flight tower, the lights, all the stuff gets pulled down because otherwise they'll get buried in snow in the winter. They build these big berms. All the buildings are on sleds. So you're driving around in these big tractors and pulling these buildings up on these berms until the snow accumulates, and they build new berms and they put those up. And they have to do that, otherwise they have to maintain it through the summer, or through the winter, or it gets buried. So when there were no scheduled flights, everything got broken down. So my first medevac took about 10 days for them to rebuild the runway from scratch in the dead of winter. I think we had that week or so that they were building the runway minus 40 to minus 70 degree weather in total darkness, right? Because that's the other thing. In the winter, there's no light. And so they had artificial light, obviously, but no natural light. So in the dark all the time, which was interesting. And it was an amazing community effort to save this one guy's life. It was actually really beautiful. Yeah, so I think it was 10 or 11 days that he stayed in our hospital, which was basically, I think we had 2 beds in our hospital, and I stayed there pretty much most of the time. I had a PA who was great, Melanie, and this particular guy was fairly stable until he wasn't, and then when he wasn't, he would kind of go down kind of quickly. But my room is literally, a 3-minute jaunt, to get to the medical clinic. So I stayed at the clinic quite a bit. I think I stayed at the clinic most of the nights with this guy. And then, and if I wasn't there for any reason, I was always, again, town's so small, I was always, no more than 5 minutes away.
That's really incredible. I mean, did you ever have to intubate anybody there?
No, not anyone, not my seasons. It has happened.
Awesome. Okay.
But no, not while I was there.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, because even just Alaska, there are times when somebody needs a medevac now, and because the weather just will not cooperate, and I can't make it happen for 5 or 6 days. And and you just, I pulled my camp mattress down, and I was like just sleeping on the floor next to her little cot, and she ate what I ate because we don't have a kitchen, and the weather's so bad, no one can bring us food anyway. And so I just, whatever I had, sorry girl, you're a vegetarian for the week.
That's right. It's like, when I was in Antarctica, it was not the case when I was in Alaska, but when I was in Antarctica, certainly I was like, oh, I'm going to order labs. So I would order labs, and then I would go draw the labs and run the labs myself. You know, same thing with x-rays. I'm going to order a chest x-ray. Then I would go pull out this portable chest x-ray machine or x-ray machine. And actually, that's not true. I did have an IT guy help me with the x-rays, but we would have to
that's nice.
Develop the film, load it into kind of a pack, like this arcane situation. But yeah, and just kind of do everything ourselves. And it's similar on the ships. We run our own labs,
Sure.
run our own x-ray, that sort of stuff, do my own EKGs, put my own IVs and that sort of stuff. Yeah. So.
And did you have like a portable ultrasound down there? Did they have like a butterfly? Well, it was butterfly even a thing back then? No.
If by portable you mean like a big, like half the size of a car, yes. It was on wheels. It had wheels. It was a dinosaur. It was probably one of the first ultrasounds, honestly, because a lot of stuff would just get recycled down there, right? Like, oh, we have this ultrasound, we could send it down to Antarctica. It was a very old dinosaur, very, very poor quality. And again, this was 13, so ultrasound wasn't really the cutting edge back then anyway. But yeah, I had an ultrasound, no CTs, just x-rays, ultrasound, and very basic labs, piccolo labs, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if they have like a butterfly down there, like the IQ3 now, the newest butterfly ultrasound. I get better images off of that than off any ultrasound unit I've ever touched.
That's good to know. Yeah, that's good to know. I have used that up in Alaska. I don't know what the situation is down in Antarctica at the moment. That would make sense.
Yeah, because the new one is amazing.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I made a lot of great friends who I'm still in touch with. And then I went back in 15 into the summer there. So it's the exact opposite. So now you got open community, people in and out, daylight for 3 months in a row, a lot of moving parts, but more help too, a little bit more help, and regular flights. So we were quote unquote medevacing people more familiar, but it's more like sort of medical transfers, not quite so emergent. The couple that I had 3 medevacs my winter, which really expensive and might have been a record actually. I don't know where I stand on how many medevacs I had to do relative to everyone else, but yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting and very expensive.
How'd the guy do who you had to medevac in the winter and they had to build the runway for him?
Yeah, that first guy did okay. I kept in touch with him, and I think so he had a cardiac event, and did fine, transferred to New Zealand. That's where our program is actually based, is out of Christchurch. That's our foreign base. And so he got kind of worked up in New Zealand, got capped, got cleared, went home. And then about a few months later, like I said, we kept in touch, and he'd had a stroke. And that was, again, fortunate, because if he hadn't been medevac, I think that would have happened on continent as well. So it was good that we got him off. That was kind of early in the season. It was April, and winter kind of sets in. Winter season technically starts like mid-February.
Okay.
So,
have you ever had to medevac anyone off any of the ships?
No, I've not. It has happened, but I've not had to medevac anyone. Fortunately, not good.
And how about like Alaska? So I know you're in a little bit more of a concentrated population center in Alaska and Juneau, but how does practicing medicine out there compare to Antarctica or the ships or New Zealand or the Indian reservations for that matter?
It's similar in a way to the reservations. I mean, so I've worked in Fairbanks, Anchorage, a couple of different hospitals in Anchorage, and then most recently in Juneau. Juneau is considered critical access. We're the only hospital, or that was the only hospital around for all of Juneau, and then for a lot of the outlying islands and communities and stuff like that. So a lot of times people get medevac to us, and then we would need to stabilize from these, like Haynes or something like that, or Gustavus, and then we would have to stabilize them and then ship them if they were beyond the capabilities of our pretty simple hospital. We would send them on usually either to Anchorage or Seattle. And that wasn't super painful except for the weather. Certainly during COVID, it was really tough. I mean, all the hospitals were full. I remember having to try and medevac people, and we'd call as far as like Idaho and Colorado, just to get an acceptance, which was really fun. Sometimes I remember sometimes it did take 2 or 3 days, not so much because of the weather, but just because just finding places to take our patients. I don't know that that was exclusive to Alaska, but certainly I remember that being an issue when we were sort of in the middle of the pandemic. Yeah, I'd say like on a best case scenario from Juneau, if there's a plane on the ground fueled up and the pilots are ready to go and we have an accepting, we're door to door probably about 5 or 6 hours. And that's not often the case. A lot of times we have weather delays, pilot timeouts, and just acceptance, getting patients accepted. So a lot of times it can take much longer.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's similar to Dutch Harbor. I mean,
yeah,
because a lot of things that you medevac people for, I would be sending them even if I was in a small community, a community hospital where we could admit people, because they need a specialist oftentimes, and it's even in a relatively populated small town, some of those hospitals don't have those specialists. So a lot of the people that I medevaced out there would have been medevaced from many of the places where I've worked.
Yeah, right. Juneau, even though Juneau is the capital of Alaska, it's not a huge community, and we did not have, we had to medevac anyone who needed dialysis. We didn't have cardiology. We didn't have neurosurgery or anything like that. So a lot of we basically had pediatrics, but not for really sick kids. We had OB-GYN, internists, and general surgeons, and sometimes we had a urologist, sometimes we had an ENT, but I think most of the other subspecialties we did not have. And the hospitals were great. Sometimes they'd be like, okay, I think we can try and manage this, and try and consult, by phone, or Zoom, the specialties that we needed. But a lot of times we it just was not fair to them, to the hospice, wasn't fair to the patients. So it was in their business just to ship them out.
Yeah. Were you closer to Seattle or Anchorage, would you say?
It was almost equidistant.
Okay.
That's kind of depending on the weather. And which plane we had. Yeah, and which plane we had. Yeah. So
yeah, like if I had the jet, they were probably If I had the medevac jet, they were probably 3.5 hours to Seattle from out in the Aleutians, maybe 4.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the jet flies really fast. But with the King Air,
sure.
it's
most of us were.
It can't make it to Seattle.
Right. Yeah. For us, it was more. We didn't often have a jet.
Yeah. And how do neither did we, just once in a while. One time I did, and I was like, oh, this is a Christmas miracle.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't use it. Then the one guy, I had a patient I could have sent to Seattle. Like, he needed to go to Seattle. It was a severe hand trauma. He needed hand. And I knew that if I sent him to Anchorage, they were going to send him to Seattle, to Harborview.
Right.
And so I was like, please let me just send him to Seattle. No, you have to go to. So, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So he goes to Anchorage. Sure enough, they're like, nope. he ends up down in Seattle anyway. And so I was just like, oh, come on. He did great too. He came back to see me 2 weeks later, and I'm like,
oh, cool.
You have all your fingers. How is that even possible? Like,
that's great.
This is you. Like, I have, before and after pictures. You're like, this is not, it's incredible the things those trauma surgeons can do.
Yeah. And that's a good point, with respect to these outlying communities who are just, they're just like, can we please send them to you? And I'm like, I know we're going to need to send this guy to the next place, but you know what, but they're really stuck. It might just be a PA or an APP, or sometimes even just an EMT or community health person who is just, they're going to drown. Yeah. And so you're just like, okay, we'll take them, because it's just logistically quicker and easier for them to send to us. And then we end up they just basically end up hopscotching, but then we can kind of stabilize them probably a little bit better than they can in their community. So this is one of those things, when you choose to live in these remote places, this is kind of what you get, unfortunately. But that's the trade-off.
And we even had some of the other islands would transfer patients to us. And it's
Yeah.
like, even though we don't really have anything, we have more than they do,
Yeah,
I have
exactly.
2
Yeah.
paramedics instead of 1,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
easier for me to medevac. So yeah, it just, yeah, sometimes you take, I guess what some people might consider a lateral transfer, but just because
Right.
that little bit of extra resource is going to keep
Yep.
that person in that smaller island from drowning.
Yep.
That you said that beautifully. So you
Yep.
work in a lot of places with really diverse cultures. I
do.
mean, like so how do you balance the cultural needs? You're in New Zealand, they have their own, you're in the Indian reservation, you're up in Alaska. How do you balance like the needs and the cultures of the local communities with your work, or how do they influence your work? And
Yeah. So that's kind of the beauty about working in these communities is that I do feel like instead of like just being a tourist or a visitor to these areas, because I work with, a lot of times the local population, I work with, the local people. I try and integrate myself into the community as much as possible, especially up in Alaska. I mean, it's beautiful up there. I used to spend my whole summers up there. It's it's just kind of, you kind of get it through osmosis, and it's really interesting. And I work in, right now I'm in Shreveport, Louisiana. Very different. It's a different LA from the LA that I'm used to, or that I'm from. And very different people, but it's been really educational for me. It's been incredibly insightful for me to understand where these people come from, and sometimes why they think the way they do, which is oftentimes very different from me. I'm kind of thinking politically here, but just in general, it's just been really helpful for me to be in communities where I wouldn't normally interact with people, and I get to interact with people, in ways that I wouldn't be able to do if I was, say, a tourist, or driving through or something like that, or just visiting friends. I mean, it's I get to know the people in a way that I just wouldn't otherwise, and it's been really amazing. So you know that cultural shift, it's an exchange in both directions. um I feel like I've learned a lot from working in these, again, really oftentimes very rural and very remote areas, that I wouldn't get if I stayed in one place, any one place, whether it's remote or rural. Just being exposed to all these different things has given me a very much better understanding of the way people think and where people come from, in their thought process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it is, and it's an honor to be able to take care of them.
it is.
And sometimes I find it's like difficult because I don't always know all of the local cultural, and so sometimes I feel like it wouldn't be difficult to step on someone's toes without even,
Yes.
without
Yeah,
even
and
trying.
I'm sure I have, and vice versa, and that's part of the learning process.
It is.
That again, I wouldn't have gotten otherwise had I not been in these communities. Again, that are so different from what I'm accustomed to.
Yeah. And so how do
So
you
yeah,
stay?
on my days off, I do try and sort of do like whatever the local people do. Like here in Louisiana, I've got a day off over the weekend. I'm gonna try and go out to the lake and get on a kayak, and I don't know, maybe go noodling or something. Literally,
Yeah.
that's what somebody suggested I do. One of my friends noodles quite a bit, and he's like, "Yeah, we'll go get you a big bass or a big catfish." I'm like, "Okay."
So for any
We'll
of our
see.
listeners that don't know like what this is, especially like our friends in the UK and South Africa and Australia,
Yeah.
noodling is when you're in like in on a waterway, and kind of where a catfish lives, and you kind of stick your hand down in there, and you sort of catch the fish with your hand.
Yeah. I
And
think you're
it's,
holding a little piece of bait, and
yeah, it bites your
it
whole
kind of
arm.
engulfs it. Yeah,
Yeah,
doesn't have like, hopefully it doesn't have very strong teeth, and then you come up
they
and
don't
you
have
got this
teeth.
big fish on your arm. Yeah.
That's
So
noodling.
I know, we'll see.
Welcome to the South.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so how do you stay like mentally and physically prepared for the demands of working in some of these, isolated and harsh conditions? Um, you know. I mean, I know, and you had the same thing in Antarctica that we had in Alaska,
Yeah.
where we become a family very quickly. But how do you keep yourself? I'm going going to work 11 days in a row. Like, how do you
Yeah.
take care of yourself?
I think I take care of myself by really, well, first of all, I work out fairly regularly when I'm working. Like, I'm pretty good about working out before or after a shift. I'm vegetarian as well, so I try and eat healthfully when I can. I tend to stay in hotels. I usually stay in a residence inn, which has a full kitchen. So I try and make my own meals. And then honestly, what really helped me is knowing that I have something really cool to look forward to at the end of it when I have, my 2.5 weeks off. That's my work-life balance. Is I'll work really hard, and I might be, I might start to get a little bit miserable towards the end of it, but then I have something to look forward to. Like, so when I was in residency, I used to do this where I'd work 18 shifts in like 21 days, and I'd take a week off and I'd go somewhere, not too far, because it's only a week. I'd go down to, like, from New York, I'd go down to Puerto Rico. Sometimes I go to Mexico. Sometimes I go to Hawaii. Just get a good surf trip in. And I remember a friend of mine saying that they wanted to do it too, a co-resident of mine saying they wanted to do it too. And, the chiefs, the schedulers loved me because I'd always work weekends. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. Just make sure I have a week off at the end of the month. I'll work your weekends. I'll work your nights, whatever. And so a friend of mine, I remember a co-resident of mine, said that they want to do that too and have a week off at the end of the month. I said, yeah, great, but you got to do something with that week. And so she did that. She did her 18, like 21 or 22 days. And then she ended up not going anywhere. She just stayed in New York, or kind of stayed in her apartment. She said, like, she just wanted to relax and unwind. And then she had to go back and do it again. She's like, that was terrible. She's like, that sucked. I don't ever want to do it again. Why would you do that? And I said, well, you didn't take full advantage probably of your time off. You can't work that hard and then only kind of recover in your apartment in New York. I mean, I guess some people can, and some people can feel recharged that way. For me to recharge, I really need to get away, get out into nature. I'm obviously a very avid surfer. Surfing is a big part of my life, but like, I've done like lots of non-surf trips. I do a lot, especially if in Alaska. We should go on like big through hikes, big kayak trips, big rafting trips, big biking trips, stuff like that. So yeah, we'd sometimes get flown in to some random remote place and then spend the next week hiking out. And that was great. It was great recharge. That would help me mentally prepare for going back in again for another, 10-day stretch, an 11-day stretch.
Yeah, not
Just
everyone has the
refilling that
stamina.
happiness bucket. No, that's true.
Yes.
You gotta do whatever it is you need to do to refill your happiness bucket. I mean, what we do is draining, no doubt about it. Even if you love your job, it's still draining. You owe it to yourself to refill that happiness bucket, recharge your batteries. And it's ideal not to get to zero, on your battery level. For me, I mean, I used to work during the pandemic. I was working a lot more, and I hated it. I was pretty miserable. And that came from, like, increased demands in the ER. I had some familial obligations, taking care of a sick family member or something like that. So I was either working in the ER or working at home, trying to take care of, basically my aging dad. So that was really demanding. I never got to recharge. And I felt like, as I look back on it, I really let my battery get down to zero a lot. And that wasn't healthy. And so my father passed away peacefully, fortunately. And so that responsibility kind of lifted. And then I was able to step back from work a bit more, and I cut it down to 10 shifts, which is where I'm at now, which I think is a manageable thing. I mean, even though I'm doing it out of 11 days, I usually work about 5 days on, have a day off to recover, and then 5 days on again. And then, the way I kind of look at it, day 1, 2, and 3, I'm okay. Day 4 and 5, I'm like, oh, this kind of sucks, but I have a day off coming. And then I get my day off, I kind of recharge, I'll go do something kind of fun. And then day 1 and 2 again, I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit, I'm okay. Day 3, I'm like, oh, this sucks. But then I know that in 2 more days time, I'll have 2.5 weeks off. And so it kind of, I have to have something to look forward to. So that's kind of the thing for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
In any of these places, when you've been really remote, have you ever felt like overwhelmed? Like, I'm gonna have to watch this guy die because this is just, it's an impossible situation. Because sometimes in
Um,
these remote areas, I feel like we get challenged above what we can innovate.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, this is kind of the trade-off for living in these beautiful remote places away from people.
It is.
I have had situations like that where I just couldn't get them out in time. I was looking at big weather delays or whatnot. Um, and fortunately, in those situations, it wasn't necessarily um, unexpected. You know, we've had there. In other words, they were chronically ill, and um, it was unfortunate, but not necessarily surprising, I guess I would
Okay.
say.
Sure.
That you know, when someone is more virile and comes in kind of walking and talking. I mean, certainly we've all had people uh, who passed that were a surprise, and that's whether you have resources or not, and that's terrible. But I don't think that it's really happened for me for lack of uh, resources or ability to transfer. I mean, it has happened, but in those situations, it's not necessarily unexpected, and the family knows we're doing everything we can. But even if we were in certain settings, it might not have helped.
That's fair, because
That makes sense.
sometimes
Yeah,
like you could land in the middle of the best OR in Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic or
yeah,
Hopkins or take your pick, and
yeah.
it would never be enough. Yeah,
Right, right,
that's
right.
fair.
So I don't think it's from want of resources, at least not for me that I can think of off the top of my head.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah,
That's great.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
what can you share any experiences, obviously without identifying information, where you've had to improvise or innovate or use your medical skills in like an unexpected or difficult situation, either on one of the ships or in one of these remote areas?
I've had a situation where I was really nervous about doing two procedures. One, pericardial window, which I had
Ooh.
not done before,
I
and I
know.
had to be
Sim only.
pericardiocentesis, not a
Yes.
window, but
Still
pericardiocentesis.
same. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did a burr hole, and I was just talked through it
Yeah.
by the
Yep.
neurosurgeon. They're like, okay, here's what you do, and I'm like, okay, you know,
You want me to
and
what?
yeah, and it worked out both times,
Oh,
fortunately. But
wonderful.
those are two memorable experiences. Yeah,
Yeah.
believe it or
A
not, I was
burr
much
hole.
more worried about the pericardiocentesis than the burr hole.
I would be too.
Yeah,
I actually would be too. I mean, I think the burr hole is becoming part of like the CALS, the Community Advanced Life Support Training.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's becoming part of that.
Okay,
Um,
yeah,
because in a pinch with the right, I mean, I don't routinely get head x-rays. But if I
right.
was really worried about a bleed and my transport was delayed, and I was trying to make decisions of care, certainly like a correctly done x-ray might show you that bleed.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. I mean,
um,
I had a CT scan. There was no doubt that this was an issue that it needed to be done. It's just that we didn't have the neurosurgeon there, and it was
oh, and you couldn't
had
get
to
him
fly
out.
them. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
we could get him out, but they recommended that we do it before we got him out. Yeah.
Oh, because you were going to have to fly and
Yeah,
they have to go. Yes. Yep. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Interesting. Oh, that's pretty exciting. So a burr hole prior to medevac,
yeah.
yeah, because you'd probably
Prevent
prevent a
herniation. Yeah,
herniation. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it was impending. It wasn't like it was one of those things where you just had to do it. So you just did it, you know.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
would want you to drill a hole in my head. I
yeah,
would
yeah,
if
yeah,
I had if I had a
yeah,
trauma and I had a bleed and herniation was a possibility, or I was going to have to be flown to altitude where, in theory, the pressure would increase. I would
yeah,
want someone to
yeah,
have the guts to drill a hole in my head.
yeah. And sometimes when you know that you're the only person who can do it, you just it makes it easier
Yes.
And I'm thinking about a particular instance. I'm going to draw an anecdote here, a parallel here.
Please.
I was going on a rafting trip with some friends, and we'd been talking about it for months. I was really excited to go. I'd done plenty of rafting, but mostly like where I'm kind of paddling and there's someone else is guiding. And I hadn't been prepared for the fact that we were going to be oar boating down this river. And I hadn't also been prepared for the fact that I was going to have to board my own boat with passengers. I was going with some friends who knew what they were doing. I was like, okay, cool, I'll just jump in the boat with you. But they had a family that they had to get down, and there was a bunch of other people who had no experience with rafting or very little experience with rafting, and somehow I became the most experienced person. And I was like, I don't feel like the most experienced person, but okay. And it had rained all week prior to that. It was still raining when we got there, when we got to put in. This was about a week-long float we were going to do. It was supposed to be a mellow float.
Rain will change that very quickly.
Torrential rain, yeah, torrential rain. Lots of much higher waters than we expected, much faster waters than we expected. Lots of down trees, strainers, and undercut banks. If people aren't familiar, it's just those are just not good situations where the bank is kind of like overlying and you're kind of crashing into it. You got down trees, which can become strainers. If you go through it, you will not go through the tree. All the water will, it just pushes you up and be catastrophic. So there's a lot of that stuff. And so we're in this oar boat, and I'm with a couple of friends who were not somehow, like I said, I'm not saying that I'm not experienced, but I was the most experienced, and that just didn't. The dog in the boat named Bart, who was a sweet dog, it was like a pit bull terrier, but that dog would sink. He's not athletic. He would have just sank. We put a little life jacket on him and stuff like that. So I'm rowing down this river, and it's really fast. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm pretty scared. Mostly for my passengers. I knew that if I dumped the boat for some reason that I could self-rescue. But I was worried about Bart the dog and my two other friends who I was like, I would feel responsible for to somehow get back on the boat and back to safety. And so we're like kind of rushing down this river, almost going in circles. And I'm like, you guys, I don't know, I'm really nervous. And one of my friends, who is a dear friend, and I do love her, she was like, well, do you want me to try? Like I floated the Kenai. And I was like, okay, if you feel like you can do this, great. If you think you can do a better job, yes, absolutely. Because I'm really nervous that I'm going to hurt someone, you know?
Yeah. She
says, okay. So we somehow pull over, which was difficult in and of itself. Pull over, and she takes over the oars. And I'll tell you, it was way scarier being a passenger. And I felt like it was actually much more dangerous. And I honestly felt like at that point that it would have been safer to just chuck the oars into the river and just float down, because the oars they're like 15 feet long, and they can, I mean, they can take you out. If you crash into a bank and it pushes you, it can knock you out and stuff like that. And I felt like that almost happened. So I just said, hey, look, I'm going to take back over. I'm going to take back over, and I'm going to do this because I think I'm the only person who can get us down this river. And because that became more obvious to me, I was like, I'm going to do it because I have to. And we got it down the river. Fortunately, the sun came out. Riverbanks dried up a little bit. Waters receded a bit. It got much more calm. It got much more fun. But it was really one of those things where, you know, just like putting in this burr hole or doing this pericardiocentesis, you're just like, you just got to step up. You got to do it because there's no one else who's going to do it. And, you know, and that kind of gives you like, okay, you know, I can't make anything worse. I mean, you can, I guess, but you know what I mean? It was just one of those things where it's just like, if I don't do it, nobody else will, and it's going to be a bad situation. So just do it.
It's an accurate parallel. And just to be thorough for our audience who doesn't necessarily know some of these terms, a burr hole is when somebody has a bleed in their head, and we actually drill a hole through their skull to release the pressure, because the pressure can push on their brain and cause it to move in places where we don't want it to. And pericardiocentesis is when we put a needle up into the
needle.
like a gigantic needle, like think like what was that movie? I don't remember,
Pulp Fiction.
Pulp
kind of
Fiction.
like
Think the Pulp
yeah,
Fiction needle, kind of like that. But you go up into the heart and you get into the window and you try to pull off the blood that is in between the heart and its sac, and it can squeeze the heart and make it difficult for it to beat. And so for the
yes.
people who know that, our medical, our advanced medical people, sorry about that. But for any of our people who are listening who are maybe like, what are they talking about? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, I love your career. Like it's very rare that I'm just like, I mean, not in a bad way, but like, like,
Yeah,
wow, that is just, it is so cool. It is so much fun. And I mean, you've worked all over the world. You get to take incredible trips. Like, I mean, you sent me pictures, you were swimming with whales. I mean,
yeah, that
and
was
you were watching
amazing.
them breach, and you go on all these cool surf trips. And so, what advice would you give to an aspiring medical professional who looks at this and is like, "Man, how do I get there?" Like, I know it's hard to tell people that because I can't really tell people
Yeah,
how I got here, but how do they become you, or what would be a
yeah.
couple of steps or a couple
Well,
words of advice?
yeah, sure. So I would say, it's not all fun and games. It fits me. It fits me really well. Um, but I'm also single. I don't have any kids that I'm aware of. Um, you know, um, so I would say the downsides of it are, I really miss community. I don't have, I do have a good community of friends, lots of different kinds of friends. I have my surfing friends, I have my Alaska adventure friends, I've got my, co-resident friends, I've got my Antarctic friends. But I miss a lot of things. I miss birthdays, I miss uh, impromptu barbecues, I miss weddings, I miss, those kinds of things. Just because I'm gone so much. Um, Sometimes I miss my home. So it's not all fun and games. I look back at it on my arc and I think that, man, I got to do some really cool stuff. And I personally wouldn't trade it for the world, but it's not necessarily for everyone. So be sure that it's something that you want to do, and and you're not. That's the other thing. I mean, if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Um, but to answer your question, how do you do it? I mean, like I said, it's saying yes to different things. It's opening the doors of opportunity or windows or whatever form it takes. It's kind of being curious, and executing. It's easy to kind of say, yeah, I would like to do that someday, and then never ever do it. But if you're really hungry for it, I mean, follow through and persevere. Because, like I said, I mean, even with my trips with Cork expeditions, I think it took me 4 or 5 years to actually get on my first trip. And I was just like, okay, like it didn't break my heart, but I was disappointed, that I didn't get to do it until finally I got to do it. And kind of once my foot was in the door, it became a lot easier.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, and just, yeah, be flexible, be malleable, and if you want to be aggressive, in your pursuit of whatever it is you want to do. I've been pretty, if there's something that I really want to do, like I said, I will do my best to make it happen. I don't
Mhm.
always accomplish everything that I want to do, but things I really, if I'm really set on something, I will,
Yeah.
and even if I can't do it in a work capacity, because the nice thing about emergency medicine in particular, and I know not everyone out there is emergency medicine, but the nice thing about emergency medicine is that, like, we do tend to be the sort of more desired profession for some of these remote
Mhm.
type positions, these extreme medicine type positions. So it's nice. Um, but yeah, just kind of, if you have a dream, don't be afraid to dream something, and don't be afraid to chase after it
Yeah.
and execute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to like take no graciously, but keep throwing your name
Yeah,
in the hat. I mean,
absolutely.
I didn't end up with a remote. I started trying to get a remote assignment.
Hmm.
And I actually had one, and then a hurricane leveled the place out in the
Yeah.
Caribbean. And so
Yeah.
then I'm starting all over and reaching back out to all these places again. And then just finally someone actually opened my letter in Dutch Harbor and was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, yeah, you can come up here." And so,
Yeah.
but it didn't happen overnight. I did other locums work in the meantime, and it
Hmm.
was, and you learn from every place you go. And
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I mean, just different ways of doing things too. There's so many regional differences that you can take the best of what you've learned and bring it to other places. When I was in residency, man, Louis Goldfrank was our director. He's the father of toxicology. He literally wrote the book on toxicology. The New York City Poison Control Center is like, the birthplace of toxicology. And so there was one way to treat alcohol withdrawal, and that was, benzodiazepines, which is fine, but, in our residency, if someone showed even a hint of withdrawal, they were admitted. There was no outpatient management of withdrawal. Then I went to an Indian reservation where, unfortunately, alcohol and alcoholism is highly prevalent, and there's just no way you could admit everyone who goes into alcohol withdrawal. At Bellevue, you wouldn't never think of discharging someone who had an alcoholic withdrawal. So it's just does not compute out there. But again, on the Indian reservations, if you admitted everyone who had an alcohol withdrawal seizure, who doesn't, sometimes does not necessarily want to be detoxed anyway, and once you dry them out, once you go through the dangerous process of detoxification, they're if they don't have a real desire to quit drinking, they're going to go out and do it all over again. It's just you're kind of spinning your wheels and exposing them to some danger and stuff like that. So, I didn't, if I'd stayed in academia, I don't know that I would have ever learned that, um, because because we were at a big teaching hospital and everybody needed to learn, and Louis Goldfrank has a way of doing things, which I completely respect. It's not necessarily applicable in community medicine, and especially in remote rural settings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the fact that you go to these places with some humility, like I'm not bringing my way, and we're not going to do this the way I've always done it. Like really, like you send them home. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, it was definitely a learning curve for me too, in that regard. And just using different medicines. Sometimes we didn't have benzos. I had to use like phenobarbital. I learned a lot. I'm like,
Absolutely.
really? You can do that?
In Juneau, we adopted the University of Washington of Seattle protocol quite a bit, which was phenobarb. IM
That's what we did.
A lot of times we'd give IM phenobarb, give them a dose or two, and just send them
Let them
out.
go home. Give them something to eat, give them something to drink. And sometimes you just have to figure, like, what is it that you really want? Like, is the heat off in your house? Do I need to call the electric company and get them to turn your heat back on? Like, what is it why are you really here? You're not here to detox. Like, you're hungry. You're hungry. You're thirsty. Your heat's off. Your clothes are wet. You need something. Like, and sometimes we just have to intervene in other ways that aren't necessarily medical.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
I've definitely campaigned to get people's heat turned back on. And or we've paid, like, we've all kind of thrown in and paid to get someone's heat turned back on.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, any other parting words for our guests, like words of advice?
You deserve to be happy. Everyone deserves to be happy. So, I mean, just follow your dreams. Oops. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry.
I can see you.
Follow your dreams, because we've only got one life to live, and tomorrow's promised to no one. That's for sure. That's something that medicine has taught me. That's unfortunately something that I've learned through, the loss of close friends and stuff like that. We weren't put on this earth to pay bills and die. And whatever it is that drives you, that inspires you, try and go out and follow that. And look, there's amazing people out there who are doing like amazing things in humanitarian medicine and working in, conflict areas, stuff like that. That's all stuff that I aspire to as well. Here I am, just like, oh yeah, I'm going on another surf trip.
You deserve to be happy.
You deserve to be happy. Yeah, follow your dreams. And like I said, I would like to do some of those things. I've looked into them, and I do hope to execute on some of those things. I'm actually going to look at some of WEM's courses to do those things. But yeah, just the point is, follow your heart. Like there are some people we need people who work at the same hospital for 15, 20 years and are institutionalized there, that's great. If that's what makes you happy, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. I have lots of friends who do that. That's not my story. You can write your own story. You can do that for 10 years and just say, you know what, I'm over it, and start doing something like what I do or something else entirely. You can, or people are like, maybe someday I'll get tired of this and want to work in a regular community hospital forever. Probably not, but I'm not forcing anything in or out of my life. Whatever, I'm letting it flow and see what comes along, and if there's something I want to chase, then I'll chase it, but yeah, just, you deserve to be happy, and you deserve to have your curiosities filled. So do that.
That is great advice. That is great advice. And with that, thank you, Dr. Faye Lee. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thanks for
I
your
really
time.
appreciate it. Oh, it was such a pleasure. Your adventures just inspire me to want to do more. And as Dr. Lee said, folks, we have so many World Extreme Medicine courses. We have courses in humanitarian medicine, jungle medicine, dive medicine. We can take you all over the world, and you can learn, and you can broaden your career and network. So I hope to see you all at the World Extreme Medicine Conference in Scotland. I'll be teaching improvised field gear there, a couple of classes. Make sure you register early. And we'd just love to see you in Edinburgh, Scotland. If you are listening, you too are an extreme medicine medic, and we welcome you to the World Extreme Medicine family. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars, and indeed the collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical, and performance medicine. Thanks again.